Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this panel organized by AISS, the Afghanistan Institute for Strategic Studies. My name is Magdalena. I'm the country director for the Friedrich Ebert Foundation's office in Afghanistan, and I have the true honor and pleasure to moderate this panel for you today. You have seen it. We will talk about a bit of an unusual topic, I might say, a prospect for an understanding between India and Pakistan in Afghanistan. Why unusual? Well, this is because usually we talk about the rivalry between these major neighbors of Afghanistan as an impediment to an understanding in Afghanistan, while we also acknowledge that, of course, their role is tremendous, and we often hope that better understanding would lead to better cooperation and development in Afghanistan. We have about 90 minutes to discuss. As you know, this is on Facebook and Twitter, so please feel free to also put your questions and comments where under the link, and we will take them up. And now, let me just raise a few points for the discussions. We have asked our distinguished speakers that you are aware are great experts. We have actually a perfect balance, not only on the gender front, the country front, but also a great mix of people who are very familiar with the diplomacy of their states, but also the academic and journalistic background, and are important voices in the national, but also international discourses. We have posed some questions to the panelists, but I think there are some questions that are also quite obvious, and of course they're free to pick up on some more. So maybe let me raise like 5 points to frame the discussion. The first is we are underway a tremendous transformation of Afghanistan, maybe even the region, through the announced and now actually moving forward withdrawal of US and NATO forces. So the first question that we of course have is, what does it mean for India and Pakistan respectively? What are the implications of the withdrawal? Is it like a positive scenario? Is there reason for concerns? How is it seen from both Islamabad and New Delhi? What are, and this is I think the next question that we have, what will the future of respective relations with Afghanistan look like? Will they be capital to capital? We, of course, have a history. India-Afghan relations are very old, but also Pakistan-Afghanistan relations. And they're not necessarily only driven through intergovernmental channels. And we have seen in the past years also a bit of an update at times. We have seen visits that we didn't expect a few years ago. We have seen a diversification. We have, of course, the big questions, how a potential agreement that includes the Taliban into the government. Should this happen, what does it actually mean for relations with the new government? If they're not in government, what does it mean for instance, the relations with the republic? I have mentioned the withdrawal, and that also means that the ball seems now in the court of the region a bit. There is a new discussion about what the regional powers can do. We have seen Ambassador Khalizad and others shuttling from capital to capital, trying to maybe create a momentum or benefit from a momentum for a greater regional involvement. But is this a rhetorical tool? Is this something that we would like to see? Is it just an ideal, or are we actually hopeful that this could happen and the regional powers can play a role? Or could this also be maybe a difficult role for the future of Afghanistan's stability? I think it might be worthwhile, and I'm really happy that we also have experts in our panel who have worked on this as well, to have a look at the current ideas that both Islamabad but also New Delhi have about their own role beyond Afghanistan, engagement in the United Nations, their whole ideas of the role in stabilization and peacemaking, because I think what we want to do with this panel is also update a bit our assumptions about policy, and especially foreign and security policies of the country. And last but not least, and I think this will be the $1 million question, can this bring us to a scenario where India and Pakistan would not use Afghanistan basically as an arena for a proxy conflict or war, as it is like feared by many observers? Is there an understanding or a potential for understanding that could actually lead towards something that everybody at least claims to prefer over the current status quo, or the worst case scenario, and that is like stability and a positive development in Afghanistan? So I raised, I think, 25 questions, and I'm really happy that we have this panel that can pick up at least some of them. And I would first hand over the floor to Ambassador Ashraf Qazi, who has, well, quite a history also with the United Nations as past special representative for both Sudan and in Iraq, but he has also been the ambassador of Pakistan in the United States and Pakistan's High Commissioner to India. Ambassador, we'd love to hear from you. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to meet with friends after a long while. I'm not sure whether I've had the honor and pleasure of meeting Ambassador Sinha before. You were in Afghanistan, but then I don't think I was there. You know, I've never been posted to Afghanistan, but whether I've visited Afghanistan, I don't know whether I had the opportunity of meeting you in Delhi or elsewhere. Everyone else, and of course our lovely hostess, I've just met and already charmed. The question, of course, is, as you quite rightly said, is in some ways an odd one, because it's the prospects for India-Pakistan cooperation regarding Afghanistan. And as you quite rightly noted, India-Pakistan relations have never been, you know, of the kind that most of us would wish them to be. In fact, since August 2019, they've reached arguably a new low. So at present, right now, the prospect for India-Pakistan cooperation influencing the situation in Afghanistan positively is not quite bright. It, in fact, isn't bright at all. Nevertheless, were India and Pakistan somehow to get over the current challenges in their relationship, then India and Pakistan could make quite a significant contribution to the peace process in Afghanistan. But for that to happen, a separate India-Pakistan process would have to happen, and we are not discussing that because that's a huge subject, as you well know, in itself. So as of now, we've got to strive not for our own sakes to have a much better relationship for our own people, for peace in our region as a whole, in the SAARC region, etc. India and Pakistan are important member countries of that. So were we to, right now, if you were to take relationships, the India-Pakistan relationship as it is right now, the relationship is not playing much of a role, of any role, in the peace process in Afghanistan. India is playing a role, Pakistan is playing a role, but India-Pakistan relations are not playing a role. The Pakistan-US relations is playing a role. US-India relations, Pakistan-China relations, all of these relationships are playing a role, but our role as India and Pakistan is dormant. You asked a few questions, I'll try and respond to them very briefly. I got you right, correct me if I haven't. That the withdrawal process from Afghanistan, which is proceeding apace, although there are some skeptics who feel that, and in fact statements by senior officials who have said that we are not withdrawing from Afghanistan. We will remain engaged, and we will remain actively engaged, and do all kinds of things if necessary. And of course, while the forces are being withdrawn, there's talk about contractors and special operations forces remaining behind, and how would the Taliban react to that? All of these are question marks. But of course, I do believe that the withdrawal process as such is a positive development, because the last 20 years have shown that while a number of benefits have accrued to the Afghan people, nonetheless, the active fighting presence of a foreign military presence ensures peace will remain a forlorn hope. And therefore, let us try and see what can be done in a withdrawal scenario such as is taking place. And what was it? Future relations of India and Pakistan, or Pakistan in my case, with Kabul and all. Well, Pakistan feels it has a colossal stake in peace and stability in Afghanistan, and so any government that comes to power would be a government that Pakistan would seek to have good relations with. However, there's no doubt about it, Pakistan has had a much more up and down relationship with Afghanistan than India has. India has had a very good relationship with Afghanistan, a steady relationship which has been very good and mutually beneficial, etc. Pakistan, one reason being neighbor, and the histories that sort of neighbors have, going back the Durand line, etc., Pashtunistan, all of these things, and then attitudes have also taken hold, which have made this relationship a challenge. But I think there is no doubt about it that the people of Pakistan, including those who run affairs, have no doubt that Pakistan has a huge stake in developing a good relationship with Afghanistan, with which a country with which we have so many links. Won't go into them because that's all known to you. So it's going to be a very difficult process, you see, because Taliban has a certain attitude towards the Kabul government and all. The Taliban do not, I think, conceive of themselves going into an election mode anytime soon. They have acquired power and leverage, as it were, on the battlefield, as it were. But I mean, there are many, many Afghans who have had experience of Taliban rule, have huge concerns about their return. The Taliban will have to address those concerns, placate them before it will feel ready to enter into an election. The Taliban also have to think in terms of their own unity. Were they sort of agree to many of the things asked of them right now, there could be severe stresses within the ranks of the Taliban, or between the commanders and their political leaders. And then, of course, the Taliban have to contend with ISIS, which claims that the Taliban have become a Western puppet and not even good Muslims. So, I mean, there are all kinds of elements that they have to also contend with. But it's my view that the Taliban have learned lessons from the past, do not think they can militarily conquer Kabul, and even were they to be able to do that, they would never be able to provide a stable rule or a stable governance in Afghanistan. So on the other hand, one has to contend with them. Pakistan is expected to bring them to the negotiating table. The Doha process is stalled right now. That's a big ask, and the Taliban, have in the past, there's no doubt about it, we've had contacts with them, but our relations with the Taliban are not ideal. They, in the aftermath of 9/11, the Taliban look back and feel Pakistan betrayed them after the US invasion in Afghanistan. So we don't have a smooth relationship with them. No, and we would never tolerate Taliban rule in Pakistan, so our Afghan friends do ask, if you wouldn't tolerate Taliban rule in Pakistan, why do you seek to impose it? The answer right now is no, we don't. Or even if we ever did, that was a mistake, and we aren't doing that. What we want really now is to see a stable Afghanistan, friendly to Pakistan, etc. And for an India-Pakistan relationship to play a positive role in Afghanistan, we've got to sort of take advantage of this assumed thaw in the relationship which is taking place. There's more talk coming from Pakistan than from India with regard to it, with the exception of the LOC, which is holding up by and large. But the briefings which have taken place in Pakistan with regard to possibilities in the relationship between Pakistan and India have not come from India at all. So maybe they're so caught up naturally, understandably, with the COVID crisis that they don't have time to sort of get into the details of what might or might not be possible with Pakistan. But there are questions: will the summit take place? Would Modi attend? Would that lead to some sideline meeting? Would that lead to some statement, joint statement, which will sort of provide a basis possibly for a renewal of talks? And I would hope that if talks and dialogue were to sort of resume between India and Pakistan, the agenda would expand to include subjects like Afghanistan, what we could do in cooperation with each other for the benefit of Afghanistan. And of course, I mean, climate change and pandemics, and the strengthening of SARC, all of those things would need to be part of an expanded agenda. But right now, is the political climate in the two countries ripe for that? And many leaders and individual persons who wield influence are not quite sure whether they have the rewards will sort of justify the risks involved in sort of breaking the mold, as it were. And of course, expectations, as you know, with regard to certain subjects, the core issues, let me say, are well known. India stand, Pakistan stand, and we speak past each other. Our positions are mutually exclusive. We still have to descry or discern common ground on which to build a negotiating process. We're still far from that. We haven't got to first base, so we are confronted with these challenges. But the idea, and I think Afghanistan, which has raised this question, has a stake in seeing India and Pakistan at least improve their relationship so they don't play zero-sum games in Afghanistan, which could be a hindrance to their own reconciliation and peace-building process. Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking us just in front of first base. Thank you, Ambassador. Qazi, and I think that's also, you already covered some ground, but also gave me a good opportunity to put some of the questions to our next speaker, to Ms. Jyoti Malhotra, who I think is also, well, not only known to everyone as a great commentator and distinguished journalist. She's the National and Strategic Affairs editor currently at The Print. And if you're not much of a reader, but like some entertainment, I can really recommend also your show, The Global Print, on YouTube, where you find excellent comments. And I will ask you about some of them. Because what Ambassador Qazi just said, he made a reference to the bury the past and move forward quote that we heard in March from the Pakistani military leadership. And he hinted a bit, but the question that I would also have is, do you think from the Indian perspective, is there actually, well, a fertile ground where this could fall on? Is it the right time for such an initiative, or is it not only because of the bandwidth, is it maybe actually not the right time? Because I remember one piece that you did that covered a bit the challenge that now Pakistan is like again in the focus of it. We just hear the discussion about the basing rights and whether like over the horizon engagement can be possible. Pakistan has more leverage, of course, now with the peace process. And then I think you quite cheekily made a piece about how India could actually get on the regional table and be actually part of the conversation. So two questions to you, but before you can, of course, say, give your remarks. Is India interested in working with Pakistan in Afghanistan, or quite the opposite? And what is the engagement that India actually sees for itself in this big discussion about the regional powers and the future of Afghanistan? Over to you, Jyoti. Are you muted?
It's myself. Yeah. Magdalena, thank you so much for your very kind comments, and especially for referring to my column, Global Print. Yes, I do have a column every week. And I'd like right here to thank the Afghan Institute of Strategic Studies, and especially to Mr. Dawood Moradian for inviting me here. It's unusual for me actually to be a speaker because I'm usually in your chair, Magdalena. I'm the one asking the questions mostly, so it's a bit odd for me to sort of flip roles. But you know, this is such a fascinating topic, the Afghanistan, Pakistan, India triangle, if you like. I'm not sure that Ambassador Ashraf Qazi would like, you know, India to be on the same table as Pakistan, because he believes, from whatever I've heard so far, he believes that Pakistan is the immediate close neighbor of Afghanistan, which it is. And, you know, he wants—
I don't believe we can exclude India. India is a very major player.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, Ambassador Qazi, because I was just wondering if you had some other points of view. But I'm really glad that you have finally come to accept that India is an integral part of the conversation and that you cannot exclude India. Because you ask any Afghan, and Magdalena, you're in Amman right now, as you said, but you do live in Kabul or have lived in Kabul for some time. And I think any one of us, whether it's an Indian or a Pakistani or a European or anybody of any nationality, you walk the streets of Kabul and you hear that people would like India to play a much bigger role than it has so far. It has been 20 long years, America's longest war, 9/11. And I remember those years. I remember that incident really clearly. I was in Delhi, of course, at the time. But I remember so well that in the aftermath of that invasion, of the US invasion of Afghanistan, when the Taliban were thrown out, and the sensitivities that the US had towards Pakistan, and they actually sort of indicated to the Indian government that you have to temper down your own relationship with Afghanistan. And I think for some time, the Indians were sensitive to that, you know, sensitive to the US sensitivity towards Pakistan, which is so interesting for me as a journalist, but just to see this unfold before our eyes, 2002, I think it was. And, you know, so the Pakistanis were absolutely determined that India has no business, as you know, and they kept talking about all these consulates. Well, we have 4 consulates. A couple of them have shut down because of COVID. But so now I think there's the embassy and 1 other consulate. But this fear and paranoia in the mind of the average Pakistani, actually, that's not true, in the mind of the Pakistani establishment, because the so-called average Pakistani, very good friends of mine, I have very good friends in Pakistan, do not believe that India is playing anything else except a stabilizing role. And that's what I think the Indian government has done these past 20 years. And I think, you know, so looking ahead into the near future, your question whether India and Pakistan can play a positive and a stabilizing role in Afghanistan, and I think the unalloyed answer, the unadulterated answer to that is yes. Because we have to look at what the goal is. And the goal is that the Americans are leaving. They've already withdrawn about 25% of their sort of weaponry. They have said, Zalmay Khalilzad has said very clearly that we are not getting out of Afghanistan, meaning they will continue to handhold the Afghan National and Defense Security Forces. He said this in none less than at the House of Representatives. I'm sure that they will pay large sums of money to be able to for the Afghan forces to undertake this transformation. And very, very clearly, the Americans and the international community will, I think, has made a compact with the Afghans, which is that we are not going to leave you high and dry, unlike last time around when the Americans left, turned tail and left, and allowed and paved the way, in a sense, for the Taliban to come in. Now, I'm not going back those years because Ambassador Qazi has just apologized also in his comments for Pakistan being just one of 3 countries in the world at the time for recognizing the Taliban. Today, I think the Taliban.
Did I mention? Did I say? I don't think I went that back.
You said you made a mistake
in history.
You said Pakistan made a mistake at the time. So
no, I've said.
Anyway,
well, anyhow, I don't want to get into a polemic, you know, so I won't.
Go ahead. Say what you're saying, Dr. Qazi.
No, I didn't talk about the recognition of the Taliban.
You said you made a mistake. You said Pakistan made a mistake. So if
We've
you're saying
made
that
many
Pakistan did
mistakes.
not make a mistake,
We've made
for
many
recognizing-
mistakes. We've made
Okay.
many mistakes. But since you mentioned, let me just make just one comment, just a couple of seconds. I think any sensible person, any sensible Pakistani, if it wants to develop its relations with any country, let's say Afghanistan, you have to respect the wishes of that country. If that country chooses to like another country or not like another country, that's entirely their right. For if there are Pakistanis who feel that no, you Afghans have to make a choice between us and somebody else, then they're not going to get very far if you know what Afghan history is all about, who the Afghans are, and what their reactions are to people who try to dictate such choices to them. Now, I'm a Pakhtun. I come from an area.
Ambassador Qazi, actually, this is, if you don't mind it, this is really my time. So if you don't mind,
But you were the one who brought me into it. But I
just said that you had apologized. You said that Pakistan had made a mistake for recognizing the Taliban being in power. But anyway, if you believe that Pakistan did not
recognize him.
All right, maybe we can keep the discussion for later.
Let's not have a
future.
Pakistan-India polemic
Magdalena,
in this discussion with regarding Afghanistan.
This is.
This took you only 10 minutes. All right, so I'll give the floor back to Ms. Malhotra to finish.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Magdalena. I just will quickly make a couple of points. If Pakistan believes it has not made a mistake by recognizing the Taliban in power between 1996 and 2001, then that's Pakistan's problem.
Is that the subject?
But let's cut to the present. I think in the present, you have 2 or 3 things happening. The first is the Americans, like I said, are leaving, and that is an irrevocable decision. What happens in the future? I think what is interesting is that if the Taliban believes that it's going to come to power like it did in 1996, then it is a second think coming, because that's not going to happen. I don't believe that that even the Pakistanis believe that this is going to happen. I think the Pakistanis recognize that this is a changed world and that 1996 and 2021 are completely different. I believe that the Taliban also knows that. So while you could have one possibility where things just get worse, there will be a civil war-like situation, I do not believe that the Afghans are going to sit back and going to do nothing. I think they will fight for their country. They have gained hugely these last 20 years, whether it's in terms of women's rights, schools, education, health. The fact that Afghanistan wants to be a normal country and wants to be part of the international community, that is a sense that anybody will get if you're in Afghanistan. And I think that gain is a very, very big one, and it cannot be compromised. In that sense, I believe India will do whatever it can to be able to help the Afghans. Now, whether it's President Ashraf Ghani, whether it's Dr. Abdullah, who's the chair of the High Peace and Reconciliation process, whether it's anybody else. I think the Indian government, and that has been the foundational principle of the Indian government, which is that we will support whoever is in power in Afghanistan. On the Taliban question, I do want to say very clearly that that it is interesting that the Taliban want to divorce themselves from ISIS. And, the question whether one is, it's a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, whether sort of one replaces the other is a separate one. But I do think that the international community can do business with the Taliban. And by that, I mean, the Taliban is no longer a fief of the Pakistanis. Of course, you have a very large Pashtun community in Pakistan, as in Afghanistan, and we know the history of the Durand line, but Pakistan is fencing its line from its side. The Afghan Pashtuns don't like it, but that's happening. That's the reality on the ground. Now, if the Pakistani Pashtuns think that they have a much more closer connection with the Afghan Pashtuns, of course that's true. And everybody must recognize that, which is why the Pakistanis do play a very, very important role in bringing the Taliban to the negotiating table. That is a fact of the ground, and everybody recognizes that. So my last point is that I think that if the Taliban believes that they want to come to power in a normative way, which is, through elections, and they will stand for elections and people will vote for them, I think India is ready for that situation as well. So if you want to come to power, whichever faction it is, or whichever group it is, or whichever party, you want to represent the people of Afghanistan, including the Taliban, I think India will support that process. Thank you so much, Magdalena.
Thank you so much, Ms. Malhotra. I would now, I have either the options to go with the gender, previous job, or country. I would actually choose to move forward, if it's okay for you, with Ambassador Amar Sinha, because you were not only the ambassador to Afghanistan quite a short while ago, but you also been posted to Tajikistan and to Washington, D.C., I think almost the same time as Ambassador Qazi. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, now you are Distinguished Fellow with the Research and Information System for Development Countries, whether you can help us to understand a bit more. I think we heard quite good about the future relationship. I mean, to be honest, not so much of the like mutual cooperation between Pakistan and India. I think there we have to still move to the first phase, but we heard a lot from Ms. Malhotra about the future relationship between Afghanistan and India. But how do you see India as a regional player? We have heard the question is, okay, is India even like accepted on like equal eye? Or is it something that maybe Pakistan wants to deal with the Americans and the Afghans and doesn't really see a need for India? But India is, of course, a key player, not only in Afghanistan, but also in the region and SAARC, and has good relations and expanded relations with the neighbors. So if you could add also to the question, what could India actually do in fostering a regional momentum? And the questions that wasn't answered yet, whether India is actually seeing a role for, or at least has an interest in cooperating with Pakistan in Afghanistan, or is it more the view of a nuisance or a rival? Do you think there is space for a positive agenda? Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, and thank you all the previous speakers, Ambassador, very well spoken. Let me first compliment AISS for this initiative, because it's also a fact that the three countries, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, do not seem to have any trilateral format of meeting, track 1, track 2, and that's really a shame. There have been some track 2 efforts in the past, they never succeeded. And I think that surprisingly, and I don't find it is very surprising, because Pakistan's stance has been that India has absolutely no role in Afghanistan. And this, unfortunately, seems to be the current thinking also, as I have gathered in some of the track 2 meetings. Now, as Ambassador said, ultimately it's for the Afghans to see whether we have a role or not, whether it's positive or not. One thing we in India definitely recognize that immediate neighbors of Afghanistan have huge role. And two neighbors you just cannot wish away. One, of course, is Pakistan, and the second is Iran. Without this, to think that you can have a solution in Afghanistan, I think will be delusional. Now, the issue really is that what sort of a role these countries see, what sort of an end state they want in Afghanistan. Do they see it as an independent sovereign state? Would they like to continue to sort of shape outcomes in Afghanistan? These are very key questions, and I'm not blaming anybody. Each country has a policy. But what the US withdrawal has done, I also agree that US withdrawal first, I think, is a reality. And I also think it's a good thing. It is a new beginning. At least there's a chance for a beginning for actual intra-Afghan dialogue and a peace. Critically, because I also see it as one of the vestiges of perhaps the Cold War, and one of the external factors which led to this simmering, or not so simmering, but actually flagrant fight happening for 20 years. And it also led to the fracture of the regional consensus on Afghanistan. So that element has been taken away. What it does, it of course imposes much greater responsibility on the region and on the neighbors to take this process forward. And importantly, it also sort of localizes the issue where both parties of the Afghan sides will have to show a much greater deal of maturity. So I have a feeling that this would necessarily create a rethink in terms of their policies, and governments and all the neighbors and regional countries will have to think afresh on how to actually make sure that Afghanistan does have peace and stability, because an unstable Afghanistan will have implications for each one of us, and serious ones. While the Americans have today determined that the threat to their homeland is far away, down the line, ISIS is not such a big threat. But this comfort may not be so easily available to the immediate neighbors, because it will have implications. Some of the neighbors, as you see, Iran, Russia, China, even Pakistan in the extended format, have now actually come out and said that what of an end state they want. And I think their message has been to Taliban that a full-blown emirate will not be acceptable. Now the issue is whether we are all willing to walk the talk, or this is still some sort of you're talking something, you're doing something else. But the reality is that any solution which is imposed through coercion or violence will not be acceptable to Afghan people, and that perhaps will create greater problems than what we think we can foresee right now. Then you had asked about what are the midterm implications. Of course, the first implication is the very nature of the Afghan society and state that we have got used to in the last 20 years is going to change. You know, we'll have to deal with a different Afghanistan, and that is why I said that we will all have to recalibrate our policies. There are serious implications for Taliban also. You know, not only its unity, but its own narrative of jihad. Once the external aggressor goes away, how does it justify a fratricidal war in Afghanistan, and how does it keep its flock together and continue killing Afghans? Now, that is a question that will be asked sooner or later. Uh, Third, from the region, while there are reasons to believe, Taliban has gone on record to say that they don't see India as an adversary or an enemy, and they would want India's developmental role to continue. So these are encouraging words. Uh, but ultimately, what relationship India and other countries will have with future of Afghanistan will very much depend on the nature of the state that comes in place, whether it comes through a consultative, inclusive process, whether it is through violence, force, and coercion. That would determine not only India's outlook, but perhaps many countries will have to reevaluate. So one implication for immediate neighbors and otherwise would be an outflow of immigrants. Already there are a lot of refugees. Both Iran and Pakistan will have to be to brace for it. But I think the Syrian crisis also established the land routes, land and sea routes to Europe. So I can foresee that a turmoil in Afghanistan is going to have effect even far away. The biggest threat to the region, I think, would come from the triumphalism of this radical group, uh, which you can see already, and that perhaps has very dangerous implications not only for the region but principally even for Pakistan. Where we have seen a lot of domestic turmoil with Tehreek Labbaik, Pakistan, etc. Whether these forces will coalesce, at least to TTP as well as Islamic State, not Islamic, Al Qaeda, have owed allegiance to the Emir of Taliban. So whether they would provide space for other such groups, and that's something that Pakistani experts here will have to look at and see what sort of Afghanistan they will see in future. In the near term, while I'm very hopeful that some outcome will come, because one also tends to believe that while Afghans have a tremendous ability to fight, they also have a tremendous ability to come together and find a local solution, provided they are allowed to do so. And that's why the withdrawal of external powers perhaps may help. But I think there would be some instability, because we have not seen signs of Taliban accepting any of the different formulas that have floated around, nor have they come out with their own vision on what exactly they want. And if you look at the violence, and particularly the sectarian violence, I think these are sort of indicators of not a very happy ending to this entire story. Um, what might be the relations? As I said, future relations with Kabul would depend very much on the end state, while in no way we are defining what it should be, but it should be inclusive and consultative. And whatever the Afghans choose, I guess government of India would support a government. And we, of course, would want a strong government in Kabul, because we feel otherwise it becomes an ungovernable space. And that is what history has shown. Uh, in terms of bilateral relations between India and Pakistan. And that is a very interesting point, because there is a narrative which tends to say that as if the solution in Afghanistan has to be sequential, and India and Pakistan first have to sort out their problems and then peace will come to Afghanistan. That, I think, is a narrative which I don't really buy into. While, of course, there could be a sense of competition, like there is competition between US and Russia and India and Pakistan. So if we really want to have stable Afghanistan, we will have to look at it, we'll have to take off our geostrategic lenses first. Because the moment we project our bilateral problems onto Afghanistan, I think it becomes more intractable than solution. But yes, I personally believe that there are a lot of things that we can perhaps do. And if Pakistan could also become a force for good, and we can we have joined hands with China in developmental aspects, in education, in nation building, in even in trade and connectivity, which are all low-hanging fruits, which is because the sense of isolation that Afghans feel because of the stranglehold on the transit itself is a huge grievance beyond Durand Line, etc., which are very historical, and which, by the way, also predates the Kashmir issue, which is perhaps the bone of contention between India and Pakistan. So to bring all subsequent issues, that creation of Bangladesh or encircling of Soviets coming in as if the Indians invited them, and encirclement, those are things which have been projected on later. So because you had mentioned about proxies, well, I don't know, what 20 years, what proxy would you think? What would be India's proxy in Afghanistan? I would think that the Kabul government has been our proxy, if I have to define it as a proxy. Though I don't think we sort of fine tune every action that they take. We treat them as independent. So if that is our proxy, I think that's not a bad way to go. And that is what rest of the world also wants. They want to preserve something that has been achieved in 20 years. Uh, and India traditionally, in fact, we have lost out also. Even when the Soviets came in there, for right or wrong reasons, we did not speak up. And we were really on the wrong side of history as far as Afghans are concerned. And that has been our policy. So we would want to support Kabul, an independent Kabul, something which is stable, which is not a threat to its neighbors. And that is something that Afghans have been talking. They've been talking about neutrality. So these are all issues that we can discuss. That what is it that you would want us that could give more comfort to Pakistan? Uh, uh, we are very, I should be happy. I don't know. Of course, I don't speak for the government. But even when I was there, I used to speak to my counterparts and say, hey, listen, come with me to all our consulates, come to all the development projects, and join hands. In fact, Pakistan has tremendous opportunity to really own the mind space in Afghanistan, basically because of its region, the history, the commonalities, and that could far exceed India's influence. But then you have to be seen as a force for the good. So I'll stop here and we can come back to other discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you also for actually raising a few questions, because I know Dr. Siddiqa, it's probably difficult to be the fourth speaker. Thank you for joining us today from SOAS, where Dr. Siddiqa, the research associate at the Center for International Studies and Diplomacy, and also works with the South Asia Institute, which is quite fitting. She's a well-published author and a long-serving past civil servant, I assume. She was the director for naval research with the Pakistani Navy, and also advisor to the chairman of National Accountability Bureau. Dr. Siddiqui, I mean, you heard the colleagues, and I'm sure you have a strong opinion on what was said before, but I would like just to pick up a few points from what we just heard. I think one theme that we had, especially from Ambassador Sinha, who just mentioned, but also from Ms. Malhotra, are the sensitivities, or the idea that there could be something that India could do or change to make Pakistan feel more comfortable or more accepting for a role of India in Afghanistan? Because this is what I heard so far from all speakers. There will be, presumably, although you don't speak for the governments, a continued engagement of Pakistan, obviously, but also of India's. And we heard we cannot ignore or wish away geographic realities. So the question is, how do you envision, could India do something to improve the situation from your point of view? And do you envision this Afghanistan of the future where both will stay engaged? Is it going to be like a coexistence, which would be better than a competition? Or do you see actually a path forward for cooperation? And I still want to make a move towards the first base that we heard from Ambassador Qazi in the beginning, when he listed a lot of issues where India and Pakistan have joint issues, joint interests, and cooperate, from demographics to climate change. There are a lot of challenges that are basically independent of Afghanistan. So I would like for you to turn our questions on the head and ask, is there a prospect for an Indian and Pakistani understanding, but not in Afghanistan? And maybe this is also the point on the sequencing. Always focusing on an area of rivalry might not help us to move relationship forwards. But these are just a few of my thoughts. And now over to you, Dr. Siddiqa, for your intervention.
Well, thank you, Magdalena, for these questions and for hosting this session. And thank you so much to Afghan Institute of Strategic Studies. I remember my first and only visit to Afghanistan, where Jyoti, Malhotra, and me were together, was the Herat Security Dialogue organized by Afghan Institute of Strategic Studies. So it's pleasant to be back on the forum. You know, a lot of my colleagues have almost said everything that needs to be said. So for me, you know, the one thing which I could say is delve into and look into the nature of relationship between India and Pakistan and see how does it impact Afghanistan. I think that at one level, Afghanistan will have to be dealt with bilaterally by both India and Pakistan, you know, independent of each other. This is how it will work out. I do not see cooperation, and for that, I mean, one issue that one needs to look at, for example, is Afghan transit trade. Pakistan continued objection to seeing a smoother transit trade. I mean, now what's happening is what is being discussed is, and what Pakistan accepts is that, you know, for Afghan trucks to come as far as Torkham, unload onto Pakistani trucks, and then move on to the border, you know, to the Wagah border, unload again into Indian trucks, but no kind of seamless traffic there. Now, Pakistan's concern for all along has been, and recently one saw this debate kind of back and forth between, you know, commentary, not a back and forth dialogue, because recently there was this interview by Karzai, former President Karzai, talking about how Pakistan has insisted that India not play a role in Afghanistan, and that has been an insistence. So some of the Pakistani diplomats, former diplomats, kind of responded independently, and they said that, no, this is not what Pakistan has insisted upon. And actually what Pakistan has talked about is its concern about India's role in fueling insurgency in Pakistan, and therefore it's nervous about India's presence there. I think those suspicions and those misgivings will continue to underwrite the relationship as far as the triangular relationship is concerned. There is very much a security-driven kind of perception of how the relationship is to be. Be it India or be it Pakistan, they see more in Afghanistan, more in security terms. And I don't think that is likely to change for two reasons. One, because security will be a problem. Pakistan recently has been talking about becoming a geo-economic hub, and that its economic connectivity to Central Asia via Afghanistan. But I think the underlying factor is that unless there is security in Afghanistan, uh, Afghanistan taking off economically, becoming financially more viable, there's a big question mark there. So security will be a large problem. And I would also like to touch upon, I mean, previously it's been stated that, my colleagues do not, I mean, in some way, everybody has said that, American withdrawal from Afghanistan is a good thing. And I think withdrawal had to come. In this, and, without going into whether it's good or bad, all I can say is that it had to come. The problem of withdrawal is not the withdrawal itself, but the process and the path it has undertaken. I mean, the way in the last 2.5 years, Americans have completely put pressure on the Afghan government, on Kabul, and with very little pressure on the Taliban. I mean, all the expectations are from Ashraf Ghani government, but not from the Taliban. So that kind of signaling, and what has happened in the process is also that there has been little investment in institutional building, in strengthening governance structures, which Afghanistan badly needs, and also internal security structures. I mean, look, United States is already talking about a security relationship or importance of a security relationship with Afghanistan, but there are big question marks. I mean, what form will it take? I mean, is it going to, so far what we know is that Central Asian republics are reluctant to give basing rights to, any basing facility to the United States. Will Pakistan do that? Pakistan government says that it cannot. There will be difficulties. I mean, now, especially it's in a CPEC relationship with China. It has other things to think about, but there is also a possibility that, through an executive order, as it happened in the past in 2001, that Pakistan gave, basing rights to basing facility to United States. So there could be that dialogue, but that then brings United States closer. So essentially, the problem is that there is no bilateral here. In the future of Afghanistan, there has to be a trilateral, several triangles, I would say. And United States is very critical. What decision it takes, which way it goes, what options it takes. I mean, would it want to kind of put some of its forces still there? I mean, use the Bagram, it's the military base there, continue to have some forces there, or would it want to completely withdraw? How would it ensure that it continues to support the Afghan government one way or the other? Now, so for Pakistan, then it depends on. I mean, it believes that it has a role to play, and the role remains also because, again, referring to Afghanistan's internal situation, there isn't much effort being put in strengthening internal security, which means internal policing. For example, Bismillah Khan, an important man who needed to be put there, maybe given the position of interior minister, but no position has been given. I mean, there is no kind of focus as yet from Kabul on strengthening of its police force, on its policing capability and capacity. So then what we have is, a sense that Afghanistan at this moment is up for grabs. Taliban, yeah, that's understood that Taliban are no longer in a position where they can confidently march into Kabul and say, we're going to have it. But they still would have a share, number one. Number two, there is this issue of how the ethnic relationships, the ethnic balance will play out. That's going to have an impact on Afghanistan's security. And that's where then, going back to your question, there is role that Pakistan plays, and Pakistan has to decide which way does it go. How much faith does it put in the Taliban? And despite that, one hears, and I've been hearing for the last at least couple of months, different voices from Pakistan saying that no. Taliban is no longer a favorite choice. But the evidence is that Taliban continue to be where a partner that Pakistan continues to depend on. They've been negotiating. I mean, there has been a visit by Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, etc. I mean, dialogue is being held with other players as well. Yet, there is still that greater confidence or better relationship with the Taliban. That's one fact. The other is there is that trust deficit between India and Pakistan. That will remain there, and that will kind of have an impact on choices which Pakistan makes or even India makes. Very recently, we thought, we heard Pakistan Army Chief talk about paradigm shift, but then we saw that there was a step back from this discussion of a paradigm shift. I do not see a paradigm shift towards each other, India and Pakistan, happening either in Islamabad or in New Delhi. There are domestic compulsions on both sides, which make it still very difficult. I think in the long term, it's important to understand that in the long term, India and Pakistan, for their own future, have to cross that bridge and at least have a more stable relationship. But we're not about to see it next month, next week, next year. It's still far way away. There is a lot of, on Pakistan side, there is a lot of suspicion and military, which has emerged as a dominant player in national security. In fact, Pakistan's national security decision-making structure today is far more dominated by the military than it ever was. And in that structure, suspicion of India does play a primary role. And this is what will determine the choices Pakistan makes as far as Afghanistan is concerned. It's trying to tempt Afghanistan by saying that, look, we'll bring, we would like to, seek help from China, expand CPEC, which then puts you in totally different direction. I mean, with this Quad relationship, India, US, on the one hand, Pakistan trying to build China. But again, the issue is that what we've noticed with looking at data from the past decade or so, that all major projects, Chinese projects in Afghanistan are mothballed. So where is the role? I mean, where is the role for CPEC? So these are some of the issues that Pakistan needs to think about.
Thank you so much. I would hand over for another comment from Jyoti Malhotra. But Jyoti, I also want to ask you, because you said in the beginning that you used to ask questions. So I assume that you talk to a lot of important people. And what Dr. Siddiqa just said, this discussion about what form could be the future engagement. So the search for the friendly neighbor that would host drones and airplanes, or the country where troops could be trained, especially special forces. Because the work with the Afghan security sector, I think, as Dr. Siddiqa said, it should continue. Is there an appetite in India to participate in these discussions? Has India not been approach for the mentioned sensitivities, or what is your take from New Delhi on these? And then feel free, of course, to say what you wanted to point out.
Right. Thanks, Magdalena. You know, it's always fascinating to listen to Ayesha because she has such a good grasp on the region's sort of strategic postures. And but I do want to say here that, you know, it was so interesting these last few weeks. General Javed Qamar Bajwa, the Pakistan's army chief, and the ISI chief, Faiz Hamid, they were in Kabul a few weeks ago, right? And we know that India and Pakistan are having a very secret track 2 conversation on trying to normalize a situation. So actually, you know, maybe I'm sort of by nature an optimistic person, and Ayesha is perhaps less optimistic. But I do think that the Pakistanis, and, you know, General Bajwa is, I think he's a very, very smart man, and he knows exactly what's happening. So when the Americans withdraw, he is, I'm absolutely sure, fearful of the blowback that can come into Pakistan. I mean, we saw that 20 years ago, of course, millions of refugees, many of whom, you know, I believe Pakistan still has 1.5 million Afghan refugees. And then you had the drugs and whatnot that came with it. So I think General Bajwa is very aware of what is going to happen once the Americans leave. Now, of course, you have the very, very close relationship between the Pakistan army and the Taliban. Be that as it may. And I think that's why if things, now these are many, many big ifs, and you know, there are so many steps in this chasm that you don't know whether you're going to be able to cross that chasm. But I do believe, like Amar Sinha said earlier, that I think India and Pakistan have no option but to improve their relationship. I mean, you know, we've been saying this for the longest time. Ambassador Ashraf Qazi was at the heart of building that very relationship 20 long years ago. And by the way, we are talking about the Americans leaving, you know, 20 long years afterwards. Let's talk about it's actually 20 years exactly since the Agra talks, the failed Agra talks, and Ashraf Qazi was High Commissioner in Delhi at the time, and he played such a big role in bringing Pakistan and India together. But I think, I mean, perhaps we can say, you know, have we learned our lessons? You know, we don't really, the answer to that is, we don't know whether the answer is yes or no, because the gap is so huge, the chasm is so huge. And for me to say that, you know, India and Pakistan have no option but to build some sort of a practical relationship, if only to improve their relations with each other and then perhaps to look at Afghanistan. But I think General Bajwa is also, apart from being an intelligent man, I think he's also a very pragmatic character. And he will see that if you have to protect yourself from this blowback, what is it that you do? And I would imagine that if there is an improved India-Pakistan relationship, the Pakistanis would be less insecure about India's expanded role in Kabul. So that's the primary sense of it, is that, you know, this Pakistani insecurity about India's role in Kabul, which Ambassador Amar Sinha referred to earlier. And so I would think that, you know, if people have to take a leap of faith, this would be the time to do it. You know, it can all come to nothing at all. This whole sort of conditions, the preconditions in Kashmir, et cetera, et cetera. I think that we should keep aside for the time being. Whether the Indian and Pakistani leadership are going to take this leap of faith, I really don't know right now. I think things are still unfolding. The Americans are leaving. Of course, India wants to play an expanded role. I think India has good relations with Moscow, which is also a key player in the Afghanistan peace process. Fortunately, I think India has good relations with all the characters in Kabul, the leaders. Mm-hmm. I think it might be a good idea. You know, so far the Pakistanis have resisted an India-Pakistan conversation in Afghanistan. When you talk to the Pakistanis, they say, no, we don't want to have that conversation. But why not? But I think this might be a good time to have that track 2 dialogue, if you like. Begin with a track 2 or a 1.5, or even, just a formal track 2 of a dialogue between the two countries, and to put your cards on the table and say, look, do you want to continue this civil war? Because that civil war is going to hurt Pakistan more than it's going to hurt anybody else. So I think this might be a good time. I believe, I don't know, but I believe that the Indian government, the Indians, Ambassador Amar Sinha will know better than me, are ready to experiment or to try different ways of approaching this new Afghanistan, that whether we like it or not is unfolding before our very eyes. So how do you shape this new country?
Thank you. These are also excellent questions I will also pose to Ambassador Qazi and then Ambassador Sinha, but I wanted to give Ayesha the chance to respond quickly to the comments.
Yeah, just one couple of comments, very quick comments. See, I think I'm definitely General Bajwa is a very intelligent, smart man. But the thing is that there's also some inevitable realities that will bring chaos into Afghanistan, and he sees that. For example, look at the Australians shutting down embassy, and the minute you have Western embassies issuing visas to Afghans who can leave. Now, there will be, which means that there will be a spurt of short to medium term insecurity in Afghanistan. So that's inevitable. For that to reverse, there has to be a sense by the Western countries, by NATO members in particular, to invest back into changing that perception. That no, we're staying. Militarily we are leaving, but we are otherwise politically, socially, whatever, in terms of presence, we are committed. So one, that has to be done. So, short term, there is that. But what and also what I think General Bajwa sees is this realization that Taliban, will control some areas, but not entire Afghanistan. But that also means that you keep investing in them so that they're part of the dialogue. Pakistan's position in the recent past has been that, look, we don't want Taliban to set up an emirate. That's the stated position. But we want them to be included in governance and in decision making. And so the reason. But that is also needed because they believe that there isn't that. It's also caused because of that trust deficit vis-a-vis India. That trust deficit is real. I completely agree with Jyoti that this is a time when India and Pakistan should shed their apprehensions and actually seriously take this opportunity, they grab this opportunity and sit down and say, what can we do? Especially my question would be that what can India do to shed Pakistan's apprehension that it will kind of feed insurgency or insecurity inside Pakistan? What are the means? Is there any thought being put in India, in Delhi, on placating Pakistan's concern over security issues?
Thank you. A lot of questions that you can also pick up. Ambassador Qazi, I wanted to come back to you with a few small or bigger questions. And the first one was actually because Ms. Malhotra also mentioned basically 20 years ago, we were trying to get to, well, maybe we were at first base, you would know this better. But of course, the question to you would be whether you see, you mentioned like, maybe not a charm offensive, but some overtures Because we heard now from all panelists that if politicians were smart, there is better cooperation, there is no option but to work together, but we're still not in the how. So what actually has to happen? What do you think are realistic steps? And then I want to pose another question, because of course, we don't have an Afghan speaker, but of course it's also about bringing Afghanistan somehow in the discussion. And we talked a lot about the mutual distrust and maybe nervousness about like what's the role and the intention of Pakistan or India respectively. But of course, there's also in the Afghan public opinion, there's a lot of distrust towards the intentions of Pakistan and the influence over the Taliban, whether what you said that of course it's not maybe not even a proxy relationship and that relationship has changed, but of course when you follow Afghan media, it's often perceived in a very different way. Do you think there's something that Pakistan could actually do to overcome this perception, to change this perception? And what would be steps? Or do you think it wouldn't be necessary in a way to, or possible to win Afghan hearts and minds in this regard?
I think what we need to first do is to separate the dynamic of India and Pakistan from the dynamic of peace building in Afghanistan. Because if we introduce them together, the India-Pakistan dynamic as it stands today is negative. It has nothing to contribute to peace building inside Afghanistan, because as some of the discussions or remarks today have suggested, Pakistan was right, made mistakes, etc. I'm the first, I write on these subjects and all. I've been very critical of Pakistan's Afghanistan policy, even though I've been a Pakistani diplomat. I've been critical of many other aspects. I'm a free citizen, I'm retired. Sorry about that interruption. My phone is ringing. So I think Pakistan needs to have the confidence of history, links, and neighborliness with Afghanistan to know that Afghanistan should develop its relationship with all the countries that its neighbor that exist in its neighborhood, and of course India, and of course, sorry for that, and of course India. But our relationship with Afghanistan can be on such a firm basis that Afghanistan interacting with so many countries, not all of whom have to have very good relations with Pakistan, should not be a problem. In the past, it's right, we have taken a kind of zero-sum attitude towards Indian influence in Afghanistan, etc. I don't see this paying dividends for Pakistan. I've always held this opinion, even as a diplomat, when you interact with your colleagues and with your superiors, it's always been my view that we need to be confident vis-a-vis Afghanistan, even though we did get off to a doubtful start, and that's again because of history. Afghanistan and the Pashtun tribes in Pakistan and the Durand Line, but that doesn't determine the future, or should not be allowed to determine the future. What the problem right now is the India-Pakistan dynamic, for the time being, as everybody's noted, is not going to turn positive anytime soon. We hope it will. For that, certain requirements or certain things need to happen, which I don't want to go into on that, because we wouldn't have agreement on that. But we can hope. It has happened in the past. There have been dialogue, very few of them, but the back-channel dialogue between India and Pakistan in the early 2000s did show promise. That fell apart for a variety of reasons, and that hasn't been restored, and today looks less likely than ever of being restored, except for now signs of a thaw. Will that lead to the restoration? What preconditions, if any, need to be satisfied? I won't go into that because that's not the subject today, nor will we build agreement. But if India and Pakistan improve their relationship, it can make a very significant difference for the peace process in Afghanistan. And as has been said, all the regional countries need to develop a consensus with respect to Afghanistan. And India, and although India may not be an immediate neighbor of Afghanistan, it's part of the neighborhood, and it's a great power. It's a great, and we are both members of SAARC, and India is bigger than the rest put together, except for one or two countries. Pakistan and Afghanistan are neighbors. Otherwise, all the other SAARC countries are not even neighbors with each other. They are on the circumference of India. So India has a huge influence. So what I believe now is separately, India-Pakistan relations need to be tackled, much more complicated than even Afghanistan. So we won't bring it into today's discussion, although it has an impact. We look forward, it should be stated, and whatever little straws in the wind are with regard to India and Pakistan relations, those should be built upon. Now, you may be optimistic about it, pessimistic about it, or let's say realistic, which is saying nothing in particular. I'm realistic because I don't know where it's going. As far as Afghanistan is concerned, our policy needs to be looked at again, needs to be rationalized, because it is, as is said, with maybe some exaggeration, no two peoples have as many links with each other as the people of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And yet we haven't managed to develop the kind of relationship that should be there and can be there. We need to look at it in that way. And then whenever India-Pakistan relations do improve, and we should work on that, then that will add to the momentum of the peace process in Afghanistan. There is, of course, the larger context of America and China. It is going to feed into the situation in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is located in such a way, and that relationship is negative and is going to get more and more negative. And Pakistan has a very important relationship with China, which America sees as incompatible beyond a certain point in the development of even US-Pakistan relations. Here, Pakistan needs to be very, very clear-minded about what it needs to be doing. I'm very clear-minded about that, and that might have certain constraints with respect to relations with particular countries, even great powers, but that is a relationship that Pakistan needs to work on. There may be problems in CPEC and with projects, and to the extent that there are, I think we're as much at fault as anybody else because of our own shortcomings, with regard to project implementation, planning, etc. But I believe the China relationship with Pakistan is of great potential. Pakistan should not be giving it up. And to the extent that there are some pressures on Pakistan that, look, this is not a very good relationship you have, it inhibits, it creates doubts and all, Pakistan is currently not inclined and shouldn't be inclined to sort of move away from China. I can see in the future India and China also developing a better understanding. They've had a contested past, there's no doubt about it and all, but for the time being, the China-US dynamic does also play into Afghanistan, and it doesn't play positively because America sees its Afghanistan policy is part of its China policy. And that is a policy which is going to sort of create tensions in the future, without a doubt.
Thank you. Ambassador Sinha, Ambassador Qazi already mentioned it, and because Dr. Siddiqa also mentioned CPEC, I also wanted to come in a bit and ask you, because this triangle, and I mean, you alluded in your comment that it could be actually a triangle of cooperation. When you Google India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, it comes like triangle of like, I mean, not terror, but like tragedy. And it's not something really positive, but of course, as Ambassador Qazi said, the dynamic is a bit negative. And if we add the like global dynamics to it, it's actually less promising because of course for India-China relations have not been so well in the past years. And even for Afghanistan, the view to China is heavily influenced by the China-Pakistan relations as well. So this would be my first question. Do you see, do you share this opinion? Do you actually see in your like pledge for not sequencing that maybe this will be like the bigger fish to fry because of the not so conducive international environment? And then the second question that I would have to all of you is, of course, in the peace process, we have seen in the past years, I mentioned the shuttle diplomacy from Khalizad, like basically heads of states meeting each other, or ministers meeting, or special envoys meeting. But now we have a chance that the United Nations could play a bigger role. And this is something maybe where you can lose a bit of your national identity and be just a member, to put it naively. Do you think this could change the zero-sum thinking a bit if the UN plays a bigger role? Or maybe Pakistan and India could find themselves in a framework that doesn't put the spot so much on their bilateral relations?
Thank you. In fact, Ambassador Qazi did mention, and I think I agree with him, that are trying to sequence it and load on India-Pakistan issues, which are much more intractable. Onto Afghanistan issue is not. It'll be a wrong start. Of course, while I also believe that because of the geography of Afghanistan, Americans may not have decided to leave. Because it goes beyond Afghanistan in terms of, if you look at the geostrategic objective. A lot of writing in America does suggest that and criticizes Biden for that thing. But they are leaving. Now, what sort of a presence or footprint they will have, I am not sure. Of course, there are speculatory reports that they're even looking for basing something in Pakistan, which hasn't been denied by all their foreign office, etc. But so we don't know. But they have also stated that they are looking and talking to other landlocked neighbors around Afghanistan, where they could keep a certain presence of future counter-terrorism operations. So we don't know yet. China, of course, starts with a certain disadvantage when it comes to Afghanistan. First, as Ayesha Siddiqa said, that all their big projects are really mothballed. They haven't started off the ground, basically because of insecurity. And even in future, I feel that the rent that they will have to pay if they actually want to exploit any of them will perhaps make those projects uneconomical unless there is security and stability in Afghanistan. And Afghanistan really takes a turn for the good. I don't know whether there are signs there. As far as reassuring Pakistan, you see, one part is, of course, reality. The other part is also the certain paranoia that we sense that Pakistani military, I won't say every Pakistani individual, tends to project and overplay that India threat card, because that enhances their own sort of credibility and relevance in the Pakistani political matrix. So they tend to overproject. Because if you really look at objectively, that what is it that they accuse of? That India uses Afghanistan for insurgency. Well, don't we make the same claim against Pakistan? Pakistan doesn't need a third country for that because we have a common border. So if those terrorists and insurgents can be pushed from Pakistan to India, I don't think any border is one way. We don't need to catch our nose this way around, really. And plus, last 20 years, look at the presence of Americans, the British, look at the geographies where they have been present, which are really bordering Pakistan, whether it is Helmand, Kandahar, Paktika. And you mean to say that India operated under the radar all these years? Then I think Pakistan has a much bigger problem than just India and Pakistan. That means Americans and the Germans and the British who were present on the bordering districts. They are colluding with us in creating an insurgency and running training camps. This is absolutely bizarre sort of a theory. So I've lived there. So these are narratives that they build to justify their own sort of policy. And this is the Pakistani military, I clarify. No? For whatever reason, and this has been accepted that they play a huge role in their own domestic politics and power structure, and they have to justify their presence. Also, globally, then when you project India Kashmir issue, which is perhaps better known, it starts justifying their continued 20 years of support to Taliban. Without Pakistan's support, I doubt if Taliban could have brought ISAF and US military forces to a standstill and to a situation where there was no outcome. Now, because that, I don't think any military expert will believe to that, and this has been written about, it's well documented. thing is, that is all past. No, and I guess Americans will deal with it in their own way. As far as the India, China, Pakistan dynamic is concerned, well, Pakistan, we feel that's an important neighbor. It's a country of 220 million people. It's a nuclear weapons state. I don't think it needs to fare from Afghanistan uh, in terms of as an interstate. As a strong Afghanistan cannot be a threat to Pakistan. I think that should be very, very clear. What role, what sort of a balance it wants in its policy vis-a-vis China and US, it is for them to decide. Will they like to be completely in the Chinese camp, or will they like to have slightly more balance? That is something that it's really not for me to comment. But as an important part of SARC, we would expect slightly more balance. And this is not to do with India, China. And I quite agree with Ambassador Qazi that eventually India and China, given the geography, the economics, the, the just the logic of a good relationship, we would get to some accommodation, and that relation will work, despite these momentary hiccups. Uh, so that is something Pakistan has to see, and if it plans to be a important geo-economic space, then to lock yourself on both sides of the border towards India, and because of that, Afghanistan, which stops your own access to Central Asia, is a policy which needs a rethink. So I think in the long term, the more we sort of ring fence Afghanistan from the other regional issues, because this argument can go on and on. That all Tajikistan and Kyrgyz border issues should be resolved. They're fighting in Fargana, and then they will cooperate, because Tajiks are a huge, important ethnic minority in Afghanistan. Or Iranians have to sort out their own problem with Iraq or Syria, and then they will start behaving in Afghanistan. That sort of a logic leads us to this endless situation where peace in Afghanistan's become secondary to various, and strategic analysts actually can conjure any sort of a scenario for not doing anything. That is my firm belief. So we really have to start looking at how to simplify the problem and ring fence it, and look at it from a purely humanitarian perspective today. No, I think Afghanistan has paid a huge price for this competition, and as long as regional countries don't treat Afghanistan as a game of bujkashi, where the Afghans are perhaps the caracas which is being pulled around, uh, only then we will move forward. That's my very brutal and frank view.
Thank you. I think it's also very appreciated by our Afghan viewers. As we come to an end, I have a last question, because we were hosted by the Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies, and you, Ambassador Sinha, already mentioned the need for strategic thinking and maybe some smart solutions. So we know that the Afghan government in the past years has embarked on a try of multi-alignment and trying to balance, even though the environment is not so conducive. And they might feel, or some might feel, the need to decide. And I think what I heard from you today is that there would be a bad strategy, because there is a commitment by both countries to stay engaged, but it might not be so easy for the Kabul government. So what would be your recommendation for Kabul policymakers to steer the triangle in this critical phase?
Well, Kabul policymakers and thinkers have also talked of some sort of a neutrality, on the Swiss model. I think there are a lot of papers which have been written on this, etc. So it's really for them, and for them to have. And I think my own sense is that the Kabul government, including President Karzai and President Ghani, do have a desire to have a normal relationship with Pakistan. But then you see, the problem is when the overwhelming evidence is that Pakistan is supporting, or elements in Pakistan are supporting Taliban, which is killing this. It creates a huge backlash. You saw when President Ghani, soon after he took over, had gone to Rawalpindi. Uh, no, and he took a huge risk, but that was a risk. He really wanted to give it a good shot. Unfortunately, it hasn't paid off, and I think that desire remains. You just speak to President Karzai, he'll tell you that he went in 12, 14 years, 12 times, with all good intentions. So let's see. I think new efforts are being made. I think the British Army Chief was there. Mr. General Bajwa was in Kabul. So I guess they are trying to figure out there is a common ground on the basis of which they could have a normalized state-to-state relationship. You see, when two states have to deal with each other, there's very little role for proxies, and that old policy of supporting proxies which are in opposition to elected government will have to go. Well, that's a reality. I know it is very tough to change policies after 18, 20 years of having invested in it. But today, I think the world has accepted that Taliban is very much part of Afghan society and needs to be incorporated. Perhaps keeping them out of the bond process was the original mistake. But that, I think, uh, got compounded later when the Bond 2 took place and then the elections took place. Though the Americans didn't accept, or the Taliban wasn't willing to come back. But this is a time when there is actually a time for healing. And that's why initially I said that both sides of Afghan equation will have to also recalibrate their own policies and what do they want to wish to do. If Taliban really seriously wants to come back as part of the government, uh, will they come with their hands dripping with the blood of their own brothers? How much longer it will take for people to forgive? In Hikmatyar's case, it is very clear that Afghans have an ability to forgive. They may not forget it, because if they had forgotten, perhaps he would have performed much better at the elections last time. He got 2% or 10% of the votes. But at least the fact that he has been reincorporated in civil society, I think it's a pointer that Afghans are willing to forget and reconcile, but the violence has to stop.
Thank you. I think
Very-
on this positive note, yes, Dr. Siddiqa, 1 minute next.
I think this is the time that, international community, especially United States, has to kind of put greater faith in Kabul, the government there. And instead of putting all its, what looks like putting all its eggs in the Taliban basket, it should be kind of, investing more in Kabul. And one final point is, I think, as far as Pakistan is concerned, I think Pakistan needs to understand it has to acquire this confidence in talking to Kabul, leave alone, leave aside India in Kabul itself. But I think one of the primary problems there is that the military which decides is dominated by not by Pashtuns. I mean, the people who are deciding, General Bajwa may be an intelligent man, but he's also at the end of the day a Punjabi, and that does make a difference.
Okay, so I think this was the most cited compliment of the panel, that he's a very intelligent man. I hope he listens to this. But in any way, I think we covered a lot of ground.
You're absolutely right, Magdalena. I'm sure he's listening very, very hard.
He probably called Ambassador Qazi a couple of times.
That's right.
I'm sorry for this. Anyhow, we need to wrap up, but I wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank the Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies to basically create a lot more work for themselves, because we made it to have first base. And I think what we all agreed on is there's a lot of work to be done on like confidence building, trust building, which is needed not only in Afghanistan, obviously between the parties, but also in both Pakistan and India. We have to overcome, I think, a few of the past behavioral patterns, and we have to be creative in formats and maybe like ring fencing, compartmentalizing. But I think the point that sequencing or hoping for we can solve one issue first perfectly and then we move to the next one probably doesn't do justice to the sincerity and importance of the situation that we're in. Thank you so much for joining this conversation, for your fantastic inputs. I learned a lot. I think for us, this is extremely helpful to also talk to each other in such an open and still friendly manner. So this was fascinating to listen to you. Thank you to everyone for joined in. You can watch this, I think, rewatch it a few times. Let's comment, give feedback to the Afghan Institute. Stay tuned for further events. And I wish everyone a really nice evening, some rest from this very heated debate, and I hope to see you all soon. Thank you very much.